Here we go.
We'll do it live.
Okay. No.
We'll do it live. Fuck it. Do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live.
Hello, this is Dylan Moore and Nima Majur of iRead TV, and that Bill O'Reilly clip never gets old. I don't know how long I'd have to listen to it on repeat before I got sick of it, but I feel like it's got to be a long time because I just crack up every time I hear it. Oh man, so what day is it today?
You've listened to it so much that now it's funny again.
Yeah, okay. Today's December 28th. It's Wednesday, and Nima and I are here doing it live. And we're following up from yesterday because we were talking about the spontaneous death of globalism, which was a fascinating conversation where we started with Carol Quigley, our favorite historian, and we moved into a new figure that we have discovered that appears, as far as we're able to grasp, has taken on the banner where Carol Quigley left off, at least for us. He is a man by the name of Peter Zeihan. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. And Nima has one of his books. Do you have it handy?
Yeah.
Nima's going to show that book.
This is the cover.
The world, the end of the world is just the beginning, and it's basically a discussion of the fact that the globalist system that we've had since World War II is unraveling itself, regardless of what any political actors are going to want to do at this point. And we're not going to go over what we went over yesterday. I definitely recommend going and checking that out. We're going to pick up where we left off yesterday about we were getting into the various geopolitical and demographic situations of four major countries. We talked about the U.S., we talked about China, we talked about Russia, and we talked about Germany. And today we wanted to get into what I think a lot of people listen to us for, which is some modern money theory as applied to what we talked about yesterday. Because when you listen to Peter Zeihan, and I've listened to him a lot, and Nima's been reading to him a lot since we found him, he very clearly subscribes to the neoclassical interpretation of economics, which we full-heartedly reject from this corner of the world. And I think it would be we think it'd be a fun idea to explore, okay, here are the predictions that Peter Zeihan has moving forward, and not necessarily that his predictions are wrong, because even if we disagree with the neoclassical interpretation, the people who run the economy appear to agree with it, and they base their actions on it, so it kind of makes it real. Right? And it's we wanted to have a conversation of maybe the impacts that we're going to see based on his predictions could be softened a little bit if we really understood better how the economy works and what buttons and levers that we actually have access to. So, the demographic point that Peter Zeihan comes from, and I'm focusing specifically on the United States here because we're the best off, and we might as well just focus on that because we live here and fuck everybody else, right? Not really, but a lot of the other world is in some dire situation, and I mean, maybe what we talk about can help them here, but we are going to be focused on the United States today. So, demographically speaking, and we're going to pull up a short clip of Peter Zeihan talking about this in a minute. Demographically speaking, one of the financial issues that Peter Zeihan is predicting is due to the fact that the baby boomers are going to be retiring soon, and they're going to be utilizing their retirement accounts in a different fashion. This is going to have some serious implications in the economy. So just a quick overview of how Peter Zeihan is describing different generations. When you're young, obviously when you're a kid, you're not producing anything. You're just costing money to the economy. When you graduate and you're working, you start to consume, but you're not earning very much. And as you start having kids, you start to consume a lot. You need houses, you need cars, you need braces, you need blah, 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 all this sorts of stuff in order to support the children. And this drives the consumption, which is what the industry needs to sell to. When you turn around,
Yeah, so I think he says between 15 and 45 is when we spend most of our money.
right. And then after 45 or approximately 50, he says this is on average when the last kid leaves the home. The family who has been spending their whole life trying to make as much money as possible suddenly loses all the expenses. So they're in their prime money-making years before retirement. They're not consuming as much, but they're saving a ton. Then once they retire, they go to their retirement account. They pull it out of whatever investments that they had it in, presumably stock market something or other for the most part, right? And they put it into more conservative assets, typically something like treasury bills, because now that they're retired and they're not actively earning money, they can't take the volatility and they have to move into something conservative so they know that, hey, if I lose this money, I can't get it back. So I need to move it into something conservative, right? So that's kind of the life cycle of investment, the life cycle of how these different generations affect finance. Now, he said typically before the World War II population distortion, right, or the post-World War II population distortion with the baby boomers and the subsequent generations, this never really mattered because the people on top of the demographic chart, which is the older people, the demographic chart looks like this pyramid where the people up top are dying and then the people on bottom are the majority, the younger people are the majority of the population. We have something a little more inverted right now. For the United States, it looks more like a column. In other countries, it's literally an inverted pyramid. There's more older people than younger people. Peter Zeihan argues that this time it matters because the biggest generation in population in the history of the world is about to retire all at the same time and pull all of their investments out of the market and stick it into something more conservative all at the same time. And his argument is that regardless of whatever else happens in the world, regardless of whatever the Federal Reserve does in terms of manipulating interest rates, I shouldn't even, sorry, I used the term. We got to stop using the term manipulating interest rates. Changing interest rates, because that's their prerogative. That's what they're literally there to do. Regardless of whatever the Federal Reserve does to change interest rates, the cost of capital is supposed to go up by 5 times over the course, I think, of, say, the next 10 years. We'll play the clip of him talking about this. And so Nima and I stuck our MMT hats on, and we go, okay, does the economy actually work like that? Right? For the sake of, let's just play the clip so we're on the same page with Zeihan here.
Which minute did you want to start at?
The link I sent you should have started it right at that minute.
Yeah, I just think I played a couple of seconds.
46:52.
So I'll just back it up.
46:52.
Okay, yeah. I'll just go to 46:48 here.
And 75 years on, this is what our demographics look like today.
Sorry, I've got the video clipped on the OBS on the recording side, but you'll still hear it. Nima, the audio just cut out. Nima, can you still hear me?
Okay, we gotta stop this because I'm not hearing the video.
Exactly, the audio is cutting out, but it is. I think it is coming in through your microphone. So just leave your microphone on.
No, I muted my mic.
Yeah, before you muted your mic, it was coming through. So just play it with your microphone on, and I think we're fine.
It's supposed to pick it up from the screen.
I know what it's
Oh,
supposed to do.
it could be my Zoom settings.
Okay.
Let me try. Yeah. I didn't have share sound on.
Oh,
Okay,
okay.
I'll try it again. All right. Don't we love doing it live?
Right.
But the screen is cut off, so
Um.
the stream is showing like a center section of the stream, but not the top and bottom for some reason. Kind of like a 16 to 9
Yes, and
movie format.
I'm not
except the rest
sure
of
how to fix that in real time. Um.
Okay.
I think we'll hear the majority of what I mean. We'll hear what he's saying, and we don't necessarily need to see the graph.
Okay.
We'll see him walking around. Yeah.
All right, let's do it again.
Adults are not stupid, so we had fewer of them. And 75 years on, this is what our demographics look like today. The baby boomers are the largest generation we've ever had. On average, they turn 65 this quarter. We are there. We've always known that this was coming since the 1960s.
Sorry, when he says this quarter, do we know when he did this?
Yes.
speech?
This is like less than a month ago, or maybe a month ago.
Oh, so it's
So
literally this.
This is
quarter.
fourth quarter 2022. He's talking right now.
Yeah.
Ready? Yeah. Think about what this means for finance. Single largest financial population we've ever had is moving to mass retirement. When you retire, you liquidate your stocks and your bonds, you go into T-bills and cash. Because if there's a currency crisis or a market crash, you lose everything. You no longer have the income to recover. You have to go conservative. This is perfectly normal. And it has never mattered until now. Because now the largest generation ever is liquidating everything all at the same time. We have always known between January of last year and December of next year that the cost of capital in the United States, because of just this factor, has to go up by at least a factor of 5.
That's it.
Independent of anything the Federal Reserve does.
Oh, what? That's it, or
Yeah. Well, I mean that's where he starts talking about something else after this.
let's listen. I just want to
Okay.
see. He says something about the Federal Reserve here.
Okay.
So let's catch that also.
The fact that there's an economic turning and an inflation fight, that's just bad timing. They're also the single largest worker group we've ever had, and on average, they retire right now. There's a lot of things going on with inflation. I'm not going to try to talk you out of labor inflation, or I'm sorry, food inflation or energy inflation. These are real things, they matter. But labor inflation is by far the biggest one.
Okay.
So, according to him, his argument is that we're looking at 5 times the cost of capital, regardless, not including whatever the Federal Reserve does and whatever happens with inflation.
Yes. So
And he doesn't really get into the exact details of why that would be the case.
well, and also this 5 times figure. I don't know where that comes from. Obviously, he's just stating that that's something that they've always known since January of last
Right.
year.
And what he does is he combs data. So he combed that data from somewhere,
Yeah,
presumably.
but he's probably not necessarily. He's not wrong on that. Most likely, I don't know what the 5 times or whatever. But the fact that the cost of capital is going to be going up, I think I understand what he means by that.
Okay.
And we can take a step back and go back to finance theory. That's why I've pulled up this formula here. Okay. The net present value formula is a formula that can help you understand how stocks are priced. And it basically says that the net present value of a future cash flow is the cash flow itself.
But wait, before
divided-
you go on to the other side of the equation, what is net present value supposed to represent?
So the value of $1,000 today, for example. So if you promise me $1,000 in a year. Sorry, the value of $1,000 in a year, but today. That how much would I pay you if you promised to give me $1,000 in a year?
Oh, I think I understand. So basically, like, hey, this T-bill's 3%. I have a risk-free 3%. So if you're not paying me more than 3% for my money, there's no my net present value is at least 3%. So stop talking to
Yes.
me. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So the net present value calculation. So a corporation is nothing but an income stream multiplied by a gazillion or thousand or however many times into the future, right? So what I just gave you is a subset of how a corporate revenue is basically comprised, right? It's a whole bunch of but also then the payouts to the investors. So a corporation is, from a stock market perspective, just a stream of income. It is a list of income streams that accumulate over time. So we just looked at the net present value of Dylan giving me $1,000 in a year. And the net present value of that future stream is calculated by the nominal amount itself, which is R at the time t, so a year from now, divided by 1 plus I to the power of t. So if it's in 1 year, it would be 1, and then the year after that would be 2, 3, 4, and so on and so forth. So this I here is what they call the discount rate here. So the I is put together from the risk-free rate, which is what we've talked about before.
Which is a T-bill rate, right?
Which is a T-bill, yeah. So,
Yeah, okay.
So if you promise me $1,000 in a year, and I associate no risk with your promise in the future, zero risk, then I would apply. Then this I would literally just be the T-bill rate, basically.
Okay.
But if I associate risk with you, then that risk is quantified, and I think in the stock market world they call this beta. So this I is put together by the risk-free rate plus a thing called beta, or we could just call it X, or it's
the financial wizard's interpretation of what the risk will be, right?
Yes.
So it's quasi-objective.
It's also, ironically, it's kind of going backwards, right? So the scientists, or the financial scientists, the theorists, or they put together this formula, but so they have a bunch of objective figures, the amount that comes in and the risk-free rate. But there's also, within this I, there is a factor X, which is we just lump everything we don't know into that factor.
Right.
Now, it's a sound theory to theorize, say, well, that X probably has something to do with the inferiority of that income stream as compared to a completely risk-free instrument, such as a T-bill or a bond or whatever. So that's what Peter Zeihan is talking about here, that factor X is going to be going up. So the factor X has in it, obviously, the risk considerations. So how much riskier is this business compared to that? But also, I don't see why it couldn't also have these demographic factors involved that he's talking about. So if this older generation now just wants to sell their stocks, they don't think about any of this stuff. Right? They don't think about mathematics, or they just want to sell their stocks. A new stock market equilibrium emerges, a new price level emerges.
Which would be lower if there's this mass sell-off. Right.
Which would be lower, right? So it would be an ex post facto explanation of the prices are now permanently lower because our factor X, which is inside this factor either, has increased. So this is his theory, is that because of this situation, the cost of capital. We interpret the prices being lower long term.
So therefore, the risk is higher in the investments.
We
Am I
interpret that the
understanding
reason
that right?
being, yeah, the reason being for prices being lower in the long term is that stock market investors are expecting a higher return because they, for whatever reason, like oftentimes it's obviously the business risk, the market risk, but also it could be these demographic factors. It's just not enough people, not as many people interested in holding stocks as there were 10 years ago.
Okay.
That's his theory.
Okay.
So from a stock market perspective, I think it kind of makes it's plausible to talk about cost of capital like that. And then what he also mentions, and if I understood this correctly, he says that, well, we're in the middle of an inflation fight, Fed fighting inflation with their higher rates. So that doesn't help, obviously, which is true, right? Because the Fed jacking up the risk-free rate is already depressing stock market prices.
Right, because why would I risk a 3% stock market return when I can just get 3% risk-free at the Fed?
Correct.
Yes.
And so that's always been my analysis since November of last year. Stock prices started their decline from this enormous post or COVID rally that happened after this. Let me just increase. So now we have the problem again, I guess, that chart is cut off. Let me just reduce the size of this. Just check in our stream. Oh man.
Yeah, it's kind of, I'm not. I thought I knew why it's doing that, but it's not the reason I thought. So I gotta poke around when we're not live.
Yeah. Let's remove some of these. That. So we've seen since.
What? First of all, what are we looking at here? S&P 500.
Yeah, this is the S&P 500, and we have it here for the past 2 years or so, I think. But so in December of 2021 was when the stock market has peaked, and now we're somewhere here. So we've been on a decline. And here, this was...
And of course, this gets
COVID
blamed on
crash.
Joe Biden and the Democrats, right? Like, oh, yeah, the new president totally screwed everything up on day one, which I'm not saying he didn't screw stuff up. But when you understand the demographics and Federal Reserve stuff that we're talking about here, you can see that there's, like, more fundamental issues at play than whatever political decisions the president's making.
Yes, there are multiple factors that have an impact on stock prices. But the big factor that I identify, at least, starting in December of 2021, was that the Federal Reserve completely started changing its tune regarding interest rates.
Just cranking it up, yeah.
They're cranking. I mean, we could actually. I'm going to put a comparison chart next to this here shortly. But sometimes these comparisons screw things up. But if we put the 30-year rate next to this chart, we would see that it starts rising right around here, right around December 2021. And so this decline has been mostly driven by this Fed rhetoric, by the Fed raising rates and always raising rates faster than previously expected.
Right. Because going back to that equation that you put up of the predicted discount rate, what gets baked into X is what people think the Fed is going to do, right?
Yes.
Yes.
What gets baked into
beta?
I.
Yeah.
Well, no, because that is the risk-free rate. So the I is comprised of the risk-free rate plus the X factor.
Okay, X.
Plus the beta.
Okay, I understand now. Got it.
So the risk-free rate is the one factor that we can definitely observe in this equation. The X factor is a stochastic. It's like an approximation, right? You look at. It's kind of like what some philosophers say when physicists they don't have an answer for something, they invent a particle for it, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like that. Let me close this curtain a little bit. Where, well, we've looked at all the factors of stock prices, the relevant factors, the income streams and the risk and the risk-free rate. And there's an X factor involved here that we can't pin down 100%. So it is an ex post facto derivative, but it's plausible. It's not illogical or inconsistent or whatever. It helps us understand to some extent what's going on. But what we're seeing, so like I said, what we've seen here for this past year has been a constant increase in the long-term rate, which is based on the rhetoric of the Federal Reserve as to where the short-term rates are going to be over the same time period. By the way, of course, MMTers understand we could save ourselves all this trouble by letting the Fed declare one rate and leave it
And
at
be done
that.
with it. Yeah.
And be done with it. But the Fed, they like to present themselves as a policy decision-making apparatus that has a purpose, because nobody wants to think that they don't have a purpose. So yeah, they're fighting inflation and they're stimulating the economy when they're done fighting inflation, and it's constantly going back and forth between this stuff. And it's really comparable to what we've seen in the realm of health, right? We see these people operate the same way. They have a theory and they take
Which
measures.
is totally true. We're on YouTube. The theories
Yes.
are totally true. Yes, please continue.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but again, we're talking about finance today. So,
We had a comment. I think we should address the comment before we.
What comment?
If you go to our chat, Jesus or Jesus, not sure which, mentioned something here a little while ago about, he says, do you think in the future we'll have to change our way of looking at retirement? People died at 66 when Social Security was started. Now people can live past 100. That's 30 years of no protection, but continuous consumption by older people. I'm thinking men will have to work their entire life, but decrease their work hours to say 10 or 20 hours a week after age 65. Well, first of all, I think for sure we'll have to relook at how we view retirement, because not only do people live a lot longer than when Social Security was first put into place, we no longer have the idea, at least in our society, that you take care of your parents, right? You shove them off into an old folks home. And so that they're not on the farm with the family being taken care of by the family. There's an added expense of like, what do we do with mom and dad now that they got dementia and they're crazy? So I don't know what that looks like. I think you also have to take into effect technology. Can the younger generations produce 1 billion times more than they were able to produce before because we have better technology, so people in retirement can now live longer? I do think we'll have to completely relook at the way we do everything, including retirement, but I don't know what that's going to look like.
Yes. I think we obviously have to revisit the topic of retirement. So what he's talking about, people died at 66 when Social Security was started. So the Social Security model is one where we're told that
MMT ties right into
the
this.
younger generation, the younger generation is financing the retirement of the older generation, because the younger generation pays their Social Security taxes and the older generation receives money from the federal government. But this is just an accounting fiction, right? So the federal government is telling us the young generation is paying in, and then we're paying out to the older generation. That's not really what happens, because if we understand MMT, we understand the federal government doesn't need to tax anyone
in order to afford things. Yes.
In order to afford things. So from that standpoint already, I think I think that's already flawed. So obviously I'd like that aspect revisited, so that we don't constantly talk about we have to
raise the taxes in order to keep afford paying for the Social Security. Yeah, we don't need to do that.
Or we have to cut Social Security because we can't raise enough money from the young generation. Blah blah blah. These are always proposals that that I've heard for all my life in all countries, basically. All the time they talk about this complicated situation with retirement, and it's really not the way they think it works.
Well, and I want to add, it's the same thing for medical care too, right? Because if you look at the federal government budget, it's like this big Social Security, this big Medicare and Medicaid, and this big everything else.
Actually, yeah. Yeah, medical. Well, defense actually. Defense
yeah,
is also.
there's a
So
chunk,
it's basically.
and defense is still smaller than those first two that I mentioned.
Yeah, so it's defense, health, and then Social Security as well. I think Social Security is not necessarily that huge a component, but definitely medical care.
Yeah,
definitely
medical care is
defense.
huge. I mean, go back to what I just mentioned about, okay, let's say you got to put dad in an old folks home and he doesn't have any money. Who foots the bill? The government, right? And it ain't cheap. It is not cheap to pay for that sort of stuff. So to Nima's point, I mean, now we could really start going into the MMT direction, is first of all, taxes are not required in order to raise funds to pay for that. The government can simply just write a check, and the inflation does not work the way that the Austrians or the neoclassicals tell you that the inflation would work. Now, I would potentially argue that, Nima's pulled up the federal, let's look at that real quick. Here's a pie chart of federal spending. So 28% is health. And I'm sorry, it's cut off again. 25% is Social Security. So there's 50% of the budget right there, health and Social Security. Another 16% is defense. And I mean, how much do we have left here? 30%. And the 30% is everything else.
Trying to fit it in this sliver here.
There, you got it. Sorry, it's small. The blue is health, the red is Social Security, the orange is military, and the rest is everything else.
Yeah.
So, people who subscribe to Austrian or neoclassical economics look at this and go, oh my God, we're going to run out of money because not enough young people to pay the tax, blah, 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 future. And the MMTers go, just chill out. It doesn't work that way. So, yeah. Going back to Peter Zeihan and his prediction for the for the increased cost of capital, right? Is we're not arguing that that's not going to be the case. What we're arguing is if we understand how the economic system works, it doesn't necessarily have to be the case. First off, as Nima just mentioned, the Federal Reserve can just put the interest rate at 0 or like 0.25% and just be done with it.
Yeah, there's no inflation fighting that they're doing. There's no such thing. Actually, they're probably causing more inflation with what they're doing right now.
Right.
But then again, the major factors for inflation are declining. Oil price was the big one, and obviously the post-COVID money bonanza.
Well,
has fizzled
based
out.
on what he just said, the big one's labor costs, which is what's going to hit us hard because he also mentioned that as of right now, this quarter, we have on average more baby boomers entering retirement than are working. So the biggest population bubble is exiting the workforce.
So that's what's going on. A lot of workers are leaving the workforce, and there's fewer left. There's not millennials are the biggest in the workforce now. I think the Gen Zers are not necessarily filling that gap. So he's predicting in his book that there's going to be labor shortages
for 10 years.
For 10 years. So the U.S. is going to be through that after 10 years. A lot of other countries are just not going to recover from this demographic time bomb, basically. But so that's true. These are factors that are MMT or not. These are real world, real resource issues that even MMTers agree we have to take that into consideration. What's the stuff that's actually available out there for us to do all these things?
Well,
but
go ahead.
What I would say is that he says the cost of capital in terms of stock market financing is going up, but that doesn't mean that the cost of capital for bank loans.
I was going to go right there. Yes.
Yeah, has to go up. It's And then, like we said, if the Fed just left the rate at 0.25% or 1% or 2%, whatever you declare a rate, leave it there. Some people say, well, it has to compensate for inflation, and inflation is usually around 2% on average. Okay, then make it 2%. Oh no, but if inflation is 3%. Oh, they make it one damn number and stick with it.
Yeah.
I don't care. I don't care. Because in economics, everything that's predictable doesn't matter, right? Everything is predictable. The entire, all the parameters in the system will adjust accordingly. This is also why what Bitcoiners don't get when they talk, oh my God, the next halvening is happening now. That means the price is going to go up because there's going to be fewer Bitcoins. No, that's complete bullshit, because everyone knows that the halvening is happening and has known it from day one.
So they're all preparing in the same fashion.
Right. So
Yeah.
every actor in the system knows with 100% certainty when the halving is going to happen and how many Bitcoins are going to be available as block reward thereafter. And by the way, the Bitcoins from the block reward aren't even the biggest driver of supply on the Bitcoin exchanges, right? It's just Bitcoins that are already out there, obviously. People want to buy and sell.
One other thing
So the actors are aware of this factor. So let's stick with one rate, but the imputed cost of capital that the stock market pricing is subject to wouldn't really be an issue for banks. There's no such figure. The banks decide what premium they want to charge based on the risk of the thing they're funding, based on the risk inherent in the thing they're funding.
compared to the risk-free rate, right?
Well, yeah, it's actually risk-free rate plus risk premium,
Right.
right? So the bank wants to make a profit from the loan, so that premium contributes to the profit. The premium also, obviously, to some extent, compensates for so and so much percentage of this type of loan defaulting.
Right. And
Which
then
is why you pay 20% on a credit card.
we'll reemphasize here, and we discussed this very much in detail in a show that we did discussing Professor Richard Werner, which I highly recommend that you go back and watch. But the emphasis that I want to make is banks do not loan out deposits. Banks are money creation arms, quasi of the government, but there's no correlation between how much money that we brought in deposits. Well, with an asterisk, I'll explain in a second. There's no correlation between money that we brought into deposits and how much that could be lent out, right? This whole idea that there's a reserve ratio and you're able to lend out 10 times or 20 times of whatever the reserve ratio is, it's complete bunk, right? Richard Werner goes over in explicit detail why this is the case, and apparently he is the only guy. Wait, what's going on here? Nima has started what? Oh, there we go. He's the only guy who has ever done an empirical test on how banks create money. He did the empirical test and found out that the bank created money out of nothing. So to Nima's point, all the stuff happening on demographics, it's very real and there's very real effects, but the money creation engines that we have access to, aka the banks, which account for 97% of the money in existence, the government accounts for 3% of money in existence. The banks don't have to deal with any of this, right? They just look at the Federal Reserve, which picks its interest rate arbitrarily, and they add what they want to in terms of their profit that they want based on the risk, like Nima said, and that's the rate. And so if we understand the system, the first thing we can go over to do, as we just suggested about 5 times, is say, hey, Federal Reserve, knock it off. Bring that rate down, right? And the second thing, Professor Werner goes over this as well, is how the banks are regulated and what they're encouraged or not encouraged to lend on, right? Professor Werner pointed out that one of the reasons that we're seeing the crazy real estate prices that we are right now is because the central bank is encouraging banks to make real estate loans.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if they stopped encouraging real estate loans and they started encouraging business investment, they drop the Federal Reserve drops the rate and says, "Hey, we need to see your portfolio full of business investments." Well, now the cost of capital just went down. And
Yeah.
there's like we said, there's no connection to, oh man, how many deposits are in here because we need those deposits to lend out. And I will explain my asterisk, which is per regulation. Again, this is entirely a legal concept. Is that a bank is allowed to in terms of how much they can loan out. I think it's to a single individual or a single company. I think I have that right. In terms of the maximum amount they can loan out, it's something like 2% of the net assets of the bank, and the deposits are part of those net assets. That's the asterisk I do want to explain. The deposits do affect it, but because they can loan out as much money out of thin air as they want, I suspect that the deposits are a much smaller fraction of those net assets than the actual loans are. Because if you have $100 in deposits, then you make a loan of $1,000, you now have a $1,000 asset on top of your $100.
First of all, the deposits aren't assets of the bank at all. They are the opposite of assets. They are a liability of the bank.
But
the assets.
I agree with you from an accounting perspective, but I think from a lending perspective, the bank is allowed to count those deposits toward the maximum loan that they're able to make to a single individual. I think.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah. There's some. So the gist of it is the banks are legally limited by in terms of how much they can loan to one individual.
Right.
And the reason for that is obviously risk management, right?
Right.
You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. You don't want to bet it all on one horse. You don't want to bet the farm, whatever.
In my experience talking to banks, they typically don't even want to push that limit because, for exactly what Nima said, they say, hey, if we start lending you that much money, we got too many eggs in one basket.
Yeah. And whether that's a legal concept or not, I'm sure that the banks have they would have their own risk management rules when it comes to, diversification of your loan portfolio, basically. But I mean, a simplistic understanding of what the bank's assets are, I mean, a good understanding of what the loans are the bank's assets, that's it. Yes, there are banks that have a wealth management arm, some money in stocks maybe, but by and large, a bank's assets is its loan portfolio, because that's what a bank is supposed to do.
Right.
Bank's supposed to make good loans.
And then reiterating, loan is actually kind of the wrong word to use. It's money creation extension or something to that effect is a better word to use because it describes the situation more clearly. They're not taking somebody's money and loaning it to somebody else. It's not what's happening at a bank. So,
but they are making a loan. They just create the money out of nowhere.
Okay.
But it is called a loan. So
it is called a loan. It is.
We can look at we look at the dictionaries, but it's generally it's a valid way to refer to those assets.
Fine. Bringing it back to Peter Zeihan, though, I wish I can get him on here, but I have a feeling he's hard to get a hold of because I have seen in a couple of his videos he does something like a speaking engagement every other day.
Yeah,
he does like 180 a year. So
he's a rock star.
Getting him on might be a little difficult, but it'd be great if we could talk to him because again, when you look at this, and particularly someone like him because he gets hired for consulting, I presume also by governments. To say what should we do? Well, if we have this understanding,
the DoD.
Yeah, if we have this understanding of how the economy works, this could be addressed much differently. This could be addressed much differently. We can say, okay, the cost of capital is going up in the private sector. Like if I want to go borrow money from somebody else who has to actually have the money to lend it to me, that cost of capital is going up. But if we recognize when we borrow money from the banks, they create it out of thin air, we can say, okay, well, all those factors that we just described don't have to apply to these banks.
Yeah. Another possibility is also that, okay, let's say we have all these boomers retiring and we have a smaller cohort of people who consume things now. I mean, stripping off all the money, all finance, and all that. Just look at that fact. Doesn't that mean that we have declining consumption spending and declining residential investment spending? That would lead to lower corporate profits, and lower corporate profits could be reflected in lower stock market prices. So,
And it may be reflected in increased risk for lending,
yeah,
right?
well, because it's less collateral, I guess. But I'm just saying,
I mean, if hey, I got this business idea. I'm going to create a business. I'm going to buy a business, and the bank goes, hey, wait a minute. Yeah, you're selling X amount of units today, but the people buying it is going down because the demographics are going down. You're not going to be able to sell X amount of units tomorrow. So there's a higher risk here. Yeah.
Right. So that's the question, I guess, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, the big question from Peter Zeihan's analysis, is that going to be a big challenge to the world's corporations? And I think the answer is obviously yes. Is that your market is shrinking.
Yes.
So if your market's shrinking, then your profit projections will have to come down at one point.
But again,
Because if we were only to look at the US, then we could say, well, you could export. But it
to who?
what it looks
Yeah.
like. Yeah. So yeah, exactly according to the demographic analysis that Peter Zeihan makes, the consuming generations all over the world are collapsing, and the US is actually among those that are better off than most other countries in the world. By the way, even Mexico. I forgot to mention this. We talked about Mexico yesterday and how little of a threat the southern border is to the US, militarily at the very least.
Uh-huh.
But also he talks about how the migration wave from Southern America to from Mexico to the U.S. has already peaked in the 2010s, or even before that. I think he says 2006 or so may have been when that has peaked, because Mexico is also going through the same demographic decline that
And
all the other
industrialization.
yeah.
Yes.
Huh?
And industrialization. So
Well,
much
the-
industry is moving into Mexico, you may not have to cross the border
Well,
because
the
you can job at home. Yeah.
The industrialization and the urbanization is the reason for Mexico's demographic decline. So it's not like Mexicans are so much. It's not like Mexicans are better off than all the other industrialized countries. In fact, if I understand correctly, the U.S. is actually better off than even Mexico when it comes to demographics, because of this, industrialization, urbanization, leading to longer lifespans, sanitation also, obviously, hygiene, all those things,
Right.
leading to longer lifespans, and those longer lifespans making it look as though the population is growing through all this time. Meanwhile, urbanization, people moving to smaller spaces, etc., leads to smaller families, leads to fewer children, which then, once the older generation retires, it's going to manifest in the form of population decline, because now we don't have enough humans to make more humans. And so he's saying Mexico is also subject to that, and that's why Mexico is going to rather turn more and more inward than trying to migrate to the U.S.
Right.
So, I mean,
Good-
just
Good
as
points.
a side note. Yeah.
I do want to address. So, I mean, we're kind of talking out of two sides of our face, right? Where we're saying, hey, MMT solves, can take care of this, but at the same time, there's these real demographic issues happening. I think the key that we're able to take away from here is that yes, these are real demographic issues that are happening that have real effects in the financial sector. However, if we understand MMT, we can adjust to alleviate that. Because I mean, like we said, if the population's going down or the consuming population's going down, consumption drops, which means lower corporate profits. That can even reflect in higher risk from the banking side. This can be addressed with political decisions, right? Again, the Federal Reserve, the interest rates. That's entirely nonsense. It's not nonsense, but it's not addressing what they think it's addressing, and it's completely a political decision and not an economic one. Well, here's another political decision. If the corporate profits are going down, You could decrease taxes.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. Well, if we get rid of the Social Security and Medicare tax, well, all the corporate profits just went up by 7% or whatever, right? Then
even more so, if we cut all the personal income taxes, the federal government deficit increases, and the federal government deficit
is free money.
It's an input to corporate profits. The deficit plus export surplus plus investment spending minus household savings is a direct increase in corporate profits.
Right. And which leads me to my next thing. What about, for example, and I'm not saying that this would be the place to address it, there's SBA loans where the government insures a certain percentage of a loan to go out for business purposes. Well, if you twist the dials and adjust that and say, okay, well, we'll increase the amount that we'll lend, or we'll increase the amount that we'll guarantee, or you can now lend to these things that are outside of the parameters that you can lend. Stuff like this
there's like all kinds of things they can do. They could give grants. What did this early settlers? What did the governments do back then? They literally gave people land to start farming, right. And so these kinds of things, we don't even know of those things anymore. We don't even hear about that. We don't have an expansionist mindset anymore. But there's so many things that even with this smaller cohort of consumers and workers, they could do much more. It's a matter of political will. It's a matter of do we want...
And these are political decisions that are available to make huge economic impacts where we're not simply at the mercy of the neoclassical or Austrian viewpoints of like, oh my God, this is what's going to happen and there's nothing we can do about it. And we go, no, wait a minute. We understand MMT and we understand that finance is downstream of political decisions. So what political decisions are we making?
Yeah. It could involve sending people to oil-rich regions, gas-rich regions, allowing small shops to set up if that's even possible. I'm not a engineer in this field.
But let's talk about small shops. Let's talk about that for a second. Zoning. So this is just an observation I've made when you drive around, at least where I'm from Washington, right? Is if you go to an area that was built some time ago, like pre-60s or something like that, right? There's commonly a little grocery store wrapped around a residential area. And with modern zoning, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed, if you go deep into a residential zone, you can't say I'm going to open up a grocery store. The government won't allow that to do the zoning, and these grocery stores that are there obviously have grandfathered in their status and are able to stay there, right? So and I'm not saying this political decision should or shouldn't be made, but with a political decision that says, okay, no more grocery stores in residential areas, well, what a great boon for the big stores in the city there you now have to go to get your stuff, right? Are there little political decisions that say, okay, this is how the demographics are moving around just based on like these zoning determinations, right? What if we make some adjustments to zoning and now these people can more locally facilitate their economy, so which will affect the supply chain issues in this way or the other, or get people to move over here as opposed to move over. Well, the possibilities are endless in the political decisions we can make that will have economic outcomes. And depending on what buttons we press, we can move the outcomes this way or move the outcomes that way.
The political brains are very finite, and the possibilities are endless.
I think that is an excellent way to put it. I think we made a pretty good point there. So, we've got the deterministic situation of the fact that here's a demographic time bomb. Here's the breakdown of the distribution chains of the transport system, and here's what we're looking at. But we say, hey, wait a minute, we still have the ability to make these financial decisions that largely originate from the political realm. To, again, it's not going to fix the problem, but I think can give us a much softer landing.
Mm-hmm. And maybe even fix some supposed problems,
Right.
such as the cost of capital. It's like
Yeah, that's where
stock
we
market.
started. Cost of capital, right?
Yeah, stock market is not the end all be all of finance. It wasn't for the longest time in human history. So
Yep.
there's alternatives. So definitely.
Word. Well, if we've hit it well, I think it's a good place to wrap it up. So, Nima, any last thing before I wrap this up?
No.
Good. Okay. This has been Dylan Moore and Nima Majur of iRated TV doing it live. Thank you for coming and checking out our live stream. This will be uploaded later. Please head on over to iRead TV, or iRead.tv to check out more of our stuff. Follow us at the social media of your choice. And thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.